Good morning, everyone, both here at the Yonsei Centennial Hall and online. Welcome to Day 2 of GEEF 2025, the Global Engagement and Empowerment Forum on Sustainable Development. My name is Jung-gil Kohn, an associate professor at the School of Integrated Technology here at Yonsei University, and I'm honored and thrilled to be hosting and guiding you through this event today at the Centennial Hall. The theme of GEEF 2025 is Time for Action, Bridging Divides for a Sustainable Future. This theme highlights the urgency of our shared responsibility to come together to take action to create more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable world. As global challenges become increasingly complex and interconnected, we can no longer work in silos. Now is the time for action, for collaboration across borders, disciplines, and sectors. By bridging together experts, policymakers, thought leaders, and change makers throughout the world, GEEF 2025 aims to spark dialogue, share innovative solutions, and build lasting partnerships. Let this forum be an opportunity not only to reflect, but to start acting. We are honored to have an outstanding lineup of speakers today coming together to explore innovative solutions to global challenges and foster collaborative action. So today, I'm pretty sure everyone is very much looking forward to this session. We will begin today with a very, very special conversation. And the title of our session will be Structural Reform Session, Bridging the Economic Divide. Please give a round of applause to welcome President Dong-sup Yoon of Yonsei University, who will be leading this moderating this session with our esteemed panelist, Dr. Jim Yong Kim, the 12th President of the World Bank Group, and Dr. Chang Yong Rhee, the Governor of the Bank of Korea. President Kim, President Yoon.
Thank you very much for coming to this occasion at this early morning hour. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to have Governor Lee Chang-yong of the Bank of Korea and former Governor of the World Bank, so that we can have this special conversation with the great minds for GEEF 2025. As the president of Yonsei University, it is my great privilege to have this opportunity to discuss important global issues together with world scholars, and I also have a sense of responsibility. You were classmates and friends from graduate school days, and later in Washington, D.C., when you worked at the IMF, your friendship deepened even further, as far as I know. So you have been forging and growing your friendship for a very long time, and your contributions at the global level have been very significant. So it is very meaningful that we have with us these two wonderful leaders. At this year's GEEF, we are focusing on bridging divides for a sustainable future. So in our special conversation, we will not only deal with structural reforms and economic divides, but also discuss the kinds of roles that universities and research institutions can play in this ever-changing world. And I hope that their insights will inform you so that you can take action in your own places. The global economy and industrial structures are changing rapidly. I'm a surgeon and I'm an educator, and I believe that in order to solve the problem, we first need to have the right diagnosis. And I believe that Governor Lee and Dr. Kim also agree with this. Now, this is how I'm going to proceed with today's conversation. First, I would like to invite Governor Chang Yong Rhee of the Bank of Korea for his initial presentation, and then I will invite Dr. Jin Yong Kim for his presentation. And when these two initial presentations are over, we're going to engage in more interactive discussions. Now, the first presentation is titled Sustainability Challenges in Korea. Please go ahead. Well, I thought that I was supposed to speak in English, but I prepared my speech in English.
in a campus, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. I'm really honored to join the Global Engagement Empowerment Forum to discuss building a sustainable future. I sincerely thank Yonsei University's President Yoon Dong-seop and Honorable former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and everyone who made this event possible. I'm also pleased to reconnect with my 선배님, former World Bank President Jim Kim, after my time in Washington, D.C. Over the years, GEF has brought together global leaders, international organizations, business, and the stakeholders to explore solutions for achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I hope this forum, under the leadership of Mr. Ban Ki-moon, continue to driving practical solutions to today's sustainability challenges. I'm asked to speak about Korea's perspective on this issue. Some people say recently the governor of the Bank of Korea is overstepping his bounds because I frequently recently speak on many social issues beyond monetary policy. I'm afraid discussing the SDG issues today may reinforce that perception. But on the other hand, while central banks governors are currently debating their proper role in such discussions, sustainability challenges directly impact our economy and daily lives. For this reason, I cannot remain indifferent, not just as a central bank governors, but also as a citizen. Sustainability takes many forms, as you know, but today I will focus on two urgent challenges for Korea's economy. The first thing is climate change, a global crisis affecting everyone in the world. The second one is our declining birth rate and aging population, a challenge that is especially severe in Korea these days. There is a global and domestic consensus that human activities drive global warming and reducing carbon emission is essential. However, Korea faces significant resistance, to speak frankly, to accelerating carbon reduction due to our heavily export-oriented economy dominated by high-carbon manufacturing industries. Strengthening emission reduction policies and environmental regulation raise concern that export companies may lose competitiveness. Thus, balancing urgent carbon reduction with sustainable industrial competitiveness has become a central issue, and that inevitably slows down our effort to reduce the carbon emissions. However, I think climate change should not be viewed solely from the perspective of export industries. It is a crisis directly affecting our daily lives and quality of life. We are already experiencing more extreme heat waves, frequent flooding, and the gradual disappearance of familiar fruits and vegetables. Our summer rainfalls used to be predictable, but not anymore. If Los Angeles can experience massive wildfire, what is stopping Koreans from experiencing similar disasters? Climate change is not a distant, but it's occurring now, and its impacts are unavoidable. Air quality is a clear example. Last week, I visited Cape Town, South Africa, for a BIS meeting. While it was winter in Korea, it was summer there, with warm weather, refreshing sea breeze, and remarkably clean air. Within days, I realized this is truly clean air, and upon returning to Incheon Airport, however, I immediately felt a headache, not just from the flood of emails about economic and political concerns, once I connected Wi-Fi, but also from the noticeably poorer air quality. Korea's air quality has improved recently, but after experiencing cleaner air in Washington, D.C., I can clearly sense the difference. As someone sensitive to lung health after experiencing long COVID, this difference is especially noticeable. Although conditions has improved, fine dust remains a serious issue. Statistically also, the cost of deteriorating air quality is undeniable. Over the past 15 years, diagnosis of atopic dermatitis and allergic rhinitis has doubled, and cases of heat exhaustion have quadrupled, now totaling 4,000 a year. Climate change directly threatens our health, making the challenges of protecting public health increasingly severe as temperature rise and pollution worsens. Another example is the increased frequency of sudden downfalls, repeatedly flooding Seoul Gangnam area, one of wealthiest neighborhood, and submerging numerous luxurious cars over the past several years. Beyond property damage, the human toll has been devastating too. Just 2 years ago, 14 people tragically lost their lives when an underpass collapses after 500 millimeters of rain fell in 13 days. Observing these intense summer storms remind me of tropical squalls typically seen in Thailand and South America. Korea Meteorological Administration now classify rainfall exceeding 5 millimeters per hour or 90 millimeters over the 3 hours as extremely heavy rain, conditions responsible for 80% of flood damage. These extreme events have more than doubled since 1970s. Given these dramatic changes, it is unclear whether our current flood prevention infrastructure, such as dams, embankment, and the drainage system, can handle these intensifying conditions. About 20% of natural river embankment are already rated as inadequate or poor, and the projections suggest that half of Korea's dam may fail to prevent flooding by 2040. We must proactively strengthen infrastructure now to withstand growing climate challenges. Third, climate change is disrupting our food supply. Last year, I faced severe criticism from agricultural stakeholders after suggesting importing more apples when our apple price increased quite significantly. Initially, I anticipate resistance primarily coming from traditional apple-growing regions like Daegu and Gyeongsangbuk-do area. However, I realized that apple production area now gradually shifting northward. Apple cultivation in Daegu and Gyeongsangbuk-do area has decreased by nearly half compared to 30 years ago, and now the projection suggests that high-quality apples will only be viable in Gangwon province and mountainous area by 2030s due to rapid global warming. So I believe within a decade, importing apples will likely become a necessity rather than a controversial issue. The fishing industry faced similar disruption. Pollock, once a staple in our dining table, has nearly vanished from local waters, with catches below 1 ton since 2019. Traditional species like croaker and anchovies are disappearing, while warmer water species like yellowtail and mackerels are increasing. Korea's fishing industry must rapidly adapt by modernizing vessels, gear, and aquaculture techniques to match the changing maritime ecosystem. I can continue on many examples, but the core message is very clear. Climate change is not just a challenge for export industries. It's already deeply impact our daily lives, health, and various domestic industries. Thus, addressing climate change and reducing carbon emissions is not a matter of choice, but an urgent necessity. Although the government has initiated policy effort, substantial progress remains still necessity. First, Korea's green taxonomy must align with the international standard to clearly define environmentally friendly activities. Signaling strong support for carbon reduction and is a very critical first step. Second, carbon pricing must be more realistic. Last April, global average carbon price was approximately $30 per ton. Europe is the highest, $60 per ton. But in Korea, our carbon price is only $6 per ton. And with these prices, companies will find it more economical to buy emission credit rather than reduce emissions, which will undermine carbon reduction targets. And the third, structural improvement to Korea emissions trading system are needed, and gradually reducing the 90% free allocation rate and tightening the emissions cap will create stronger incentives for the effective emission trading at the trading platform. The Bank of Korea is also increasing its effort by conducting financial stress tests on a climate-related risk. Financial institutions traditionally manage risks like loan defaults and real estate fluctuation, but the climate-driven risk is a kind of new things and introduce unexpected tail risk, not yet fully understood by us. Consider events like Los Angeles wildfire or Australia's 6 months wildfire crisis happen in Korea in the near future. In that case, severe localized climate damage could cause significant financial losses for households and businesses, but it also destabilizing financial institutions who has exposure to them, and that can spread out the whole economy too. Therefore, the Bank of Korea actively research climate tail risk impact on our industry and especially financial system, conducting stress tests with financial institutions on the various scenarios. We will have several events together with the government to emphasize this is a coming future. At the same time, Bank of Korea employees are also committed to reducing our carbon emissions through research, but also daily practices. Believing even small actions matter, we have adopted eco-friendly measures such as using recycled paper business card, reducing plastic use, and turning off unused lights, and implementing license plate-based driving restriction. We believe all small effort matters eventually. And in that regard, I also wear the green suits today. And beyond, let's move on to the second topic. Beyond climate change, one of the other pressing sustainability challenge is our demographic crisis, an aging population combined with extremely low fertility rate. Korea's total fertility rate slightly rose to 0.75 in 2024 from 0.72 in 2023. This is a very good news, actually, last year, even though it's a small uptick, because we are really thinking that when we see the bottom of this fertility rate downfalls, but it's a good news. But 0.75 is not enough. If this trend continues, Korea faces an irreversible population crisis that threatens economic stability and social cohesion. Some people suggest that population decline might have benefit such as reduced pollution, low energy consumption, and higher GDP per capita, possibly enhancing quality of life. However, that view dangerously oversimplifies the issue. A fertility rate 0.75 lead not to gradual decline, but rapid demographic collapse, undermining economic and social stability. The OECD average fertility rate is 1.4. The difference between the fertility rate 0.75 and OECD average 1.4 significantly impact economic growth prospect. At 0.75, Korea's population would shrink from 51 million to 30 million in 50 years, just 58% of today's figure. In contrast, the rate of 1.4, the population decline is less severe, reaching 43 million, 83% of total level, still in the 50 years later. From a purely demographic standpoint, The difference in GDP growth rate between these two numbers would amount to 0.4 percentage point growth annually, but the true cost beyond this simple calculation, a declining youth population, crucial for innovation, entrepreneurship, and the economic dynamism, would severely undermine Korea's long-term growth potential. According to the recent Bank of Korea study, Korea's potential growth rate, currently around 2%, may approach near 0% by the late 2040. If fertility rate remains at 0.75, Korea will inevitably face prolonged negative economic growth after 2050. Beyond GDP, persistently low fertility will create substantial fiscal strain, increasing the burden of young generation. As the elderly population surge, spending on pension, health care, elderly care will rise significantly. And according to our National Assembly Budget Office calculation, our national debt to GDP ratio, currently 46%, is projected to reach 180% within 50 years. And the burden on young Koreans will become particularly overwhelming. Currently, 4 working age individuals support each elderly person, but at the fertility rate of 0.75, this ratio will decline to 1:1 within 50 years. That's a dramatic change. Moreover, what I'm worried is economic instability from demographics shift, increase society's vulnerability to populism. Stagnant growth exacerbates income inequality, deepens generation and the class divides, and fuels political polarization. Politicians and governments may resort to populist fiscal policies such as direct cash handouts and temporary welfare measures, providing short-term relief without addressing underlying issues. Such policies risk creating a cycle of fiscal inefficiency and mounting national debt, exacerbating rather than resolving the core problems. To prevent economic sustainability, decisive action must be taken urgently. I think avoid this falling population trend, raising the fertility rate to some viable level is critical. Completely reversing the population decline may be unrealistic, since many advanced economies face similar demographic challenges of declining population. But at the minimum, we must strive to reach the OECD average fertility rate 1.4, given that, as I demonstrate, what it means between the number 0.75 and 1.4. Then the critical question is, why has Korea's fertility rate fallen so drastically? The answer lies in structural barriers discouraging young people from marriage and parenthood. Bank of Korea recently studied, and our study results indicate that young Koreans delay or forego marriage and childbirth due to intense competition and anxiety over employment, housing, and childcare. Young people today face fierce competition for scarce, high-quality jobs, making career stability difficult. Simultaneously, soaring housing prices make home ownership unattainable. Under these pressures, raising children is more than a challenge. And it is overwhelming financial and emotional burden, and it's natural and it's kind of understandable why they gave up children. Major driver of this crisis is, there can be many reasons, but the Bank of Korea study find that one of the major drivers of this crisis is extreme concentration of population and economic activity in Seoul metropolitan area. We compare our concentration rate with the 35 OECD countries, and we find Korea's urban concentration is uncomparable with advanced countries. For example, over 50% of Korea's GDP, population, and jobs are concentrated in the Seoul area, much higher than 5% in the US and Germany, 10 and 20% in UK and Italy, and 30% in Japan. While Korea's rapid economic development, so-called Miracle on Han River, transformed the country into an economic powerhouse, and also it centralized infrastructure, talents, and opportunities in Seoul. It was a good outcome while we are developing. But as a consequence, young people continue to migrating to capital for career perspective, draining vitality from regional economies and pushing many toward demographic extinction these days. Korea's highly competitive university entrance exam system also contribute to this trend. Admissions to the prestigious university, Yonsei is one of them, is considered essential not only for stable employment, but also for social status and marriage prospect. This fuels intense competition for limited spots at elite universities, overwhelmingly located in Seoul. Private education has become critical, prompting families to relocate to Seoul, a affluent area like Gangnam, known for high-quality private educational infrastructure. Many parents, unable to afford home ownership, then they instead rely on costly rental housing to secure educational advantages when their children are in school ages. This strategy appears justified. When you look at the statistical result, students from Seoul account for 32% of admissions to Seoul national universities, despite they represent only 16% of school-age population. So Seoul area has a 16% of high school graduate, but they account for 32% admissions in Seoul National University. I believe Yonsei University has a very similar trend. And most strikingly, students from the Gangnam-gu alone constitute 12% of SNU admissions, 3 times to their 4% share of school-age residents. Relocating to Gangnam-gu is therefore seen as essential for top university admissions, and which intensified Seoul's population density, rising housing prices, and the worsening fertility crisis because they have to compete in a small area. Korea's university admission system is excessively competitive by any standard. Parents think they sacrificed their quality of life and retirement saving for their children, investing considerable resources to secure their children's admission to elite universities. When they find their children are not working, they say, "Do you know how much sacrifice I'm making for you?" But on the other hand, paradoxically, this intense pursuit of academic success imposes heavy cost on both parents and children. From as early as a kindergarten, students experience relentless pressure and burnout, and depriving them of childhood joys and healthy adolescence. I now see many youngsters who has to consult with a medical doctor for their psychic problems because they have never played. They just study from age 6 until 19 for the college competition. This is the current situation. Korea's critically low fertility rate, extreme population concentration in Seoul area and metropolitan area, and overheated university competition seems like a separate issues, but they are deeply interconnected. Left unresolved, these challenges, drastic population decline, persistently negative economic growth, escalating social tension, and diminishing opportunity for youth will push Korea toward unsustainable tipping point. Addressing this structural issue simultaneously is challenging, yet the urgency demands bold action, and Bank of Korea recently proposed 2 bold suggestions. One is foster limited number of regional hub cities, and the second one is a regional proportional admission system. Given, I think I'm spending too much time, but let me just explain intuitively what we are saying. On the last 20 years, when we see the population really concentrating in Seoul area, government did a lot of many policies for the kind of proportional or the equal distribution across the whole Korean peninsula. But the intention was good. but they invest a lot of money on infrastructure and other things, but too many small cities. It's simply because political reason. Many politicians say, our region first. Okay, let's develop the suburban area, but why don't you develop our first? So each politician competes for the money. And also government, because the political pressure, has to equally distribute the money across the whole area. So intention was good, but since each investment on each region, city was so small, so it cannot build up the critical mass for the basic infrastructure such as education, hospitals, and anything. So basically, result is they build a lot of, many public companies move out of Seoul to the areas, but distribute the whole different cities. But instead of moving the population to those cities, still many people still live in Seoul, commute by train to their area, coming back. And we see a lot of waste. So our study shows that by considering our land size and the population size, Bank of Korea study found that we can afford only 2 to 6, maximum 6, probably then maybe also large, 2 to 6 kind of mega cities, which we can make to compete with Seoul area. By spending all our government expenditures, developing infrastructure only into the small number of the cities, that way we can make them compete to make them that they can compete with the Seoul area. So that's one of the proposals that we do. And the second proposal that we made for the Korea's college admission system, we propose regional proportional admission system, where universities voluntarily allocate admissions based on each region's proportion of high school seniors. Despite multiple revisions to university entrance system, like the previous policy example, excessive competition in university admissions remain unresolved. BOK's new proposal seeks to enhance universities' autonomy in admission while strongly requiring balanced regional representation, proportional to the number of high school graduates. That can be a crucial step to address extreme competition. Adopting this system offers several benefits. First, it reduces the disproportionate influence of socio-economic factors such as parental wealth and private education, thus significantly enhancing social mobility. Second, dispersing admissions competition from Seoul area would ease demographic pressure, stabilizing Seoul housing prices, and improve fertility rate, therefore. Third, I believe attracting students from diverse regions promote mutual understanding among students, social cohesion, and reduce regional disparities. This proposal does not require government intervention or legal changes, relying instead of the willingness and initiative of leading universities like Yonsei University. In Korea, there remains a strong belief that selecting students based solely on academic score is the fairest, leading resistance to BOK's proposal. Some universities argue that they already implement regional proportional admissions for about 15% of their freshmen. However, such a limited quota can stigmatize these students and have insufficient impact on demographic or housing pressures in Seoul. Therefore, to be effective, regional proportional admission must be applied to most incoming students' admissions. In many advanced nations, regional diversity in admission is widely accepted and encouraged. I believe Dr. Jim Kim, joining us today, and the former president of Dartmouth College, understand this issue very well, and I hope he could highlight how Korea's test score-based admissions is an exception globally, and how this kind of reform that we are suggesting could realistically occur through proactive leadership at the major universities. In my view, allowing universities great flexibility in evaluating applicants on the minimum requirement of regional proportionality would better acknowledge and fairly recognize diverse talent. Human talent is far too diverse to be measured by the academic test alone. Yet, our current system prioritizes very narrow skills, memorization, quick mathematical calculation, and rapid text summarization under time pressure. These skills overly rewarded by standardized exam. And I have to confess that I have to possess these particular skills and was a major beneficiary of Korea's college admission system. However, if I ask to write a creative essay over a week, I doubt I might have excelled in the entrance exam. Today, I believe many students in the elite universities often share certain characteristics, if I exaggerate, such as a personality that diligently follow instructions without rebellion, a willingness to endure 15 years of repetitive study from kindergarten, an IQ high enough to handle the academic workload, but not so high as to question or challenge the pressure. So we are that kind of students in Yonsei, Seoul National, and Korea University. When Korea's primary goal was catching up with the more advanced nations, that kind of system was beneficial in developing individuals who excelled in following orders and carrying out assigned tasks. However, with Korea now at the forefront of global technological competition, we need people, not just following the order, but people who are unafraid of exploring new frontiers, therefore bringing diverse background and innovative thinking is very crucial. So I think it's time for universities to broaden their evaluation criteria and nurture diverse talents by implementing and changing the admission system, which is solely based on test score. Let me stop here, and then the challenge highlight today, climate change and demographic crisis, pose critical threat and require urgent action. Korea has achieved remarkable economic growth, joining the rank of the advanced economies. Now we must focus on enhancing individual well-being, ensuring prosperity and happiness for all citizens, and through bold decisions, we can develop vibrant, youth-friendly, green regional hubs that combine climate change and support marriage and childbirth. The Bank of Korea remains fully committed to securing sustainable, prosperous future for the upcoming generation. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that you are very busy, but thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us and deliver your message. We talk about the climate crisis, and we all know that the climate crisis is very serious. But now in Korea, people are experiencing direct impact of climate change. And he mentioned the example of how Apple is not really growing in Daegu or the Gyeongsang-Bukdo province, but rather in the next 50 years, we will have to go to Gangwon province in the mountainous areas for apples. And he also mentioned that fisheries and fish patterns are changing because of the rising sea temperature. So that was very interesting and relevant. And he also mentioned the issue, the social issues in Korea of so much concentration in Seoul and the surrounding metropolitan area. And we need to promote regional balanced development. And we may also need to develop some mega cities across the country to avoid excessive concentration in the capital area, and this would also lead to more equal education opportunities for people, not only in the capital area, but also in other regions. And he mentioned that this can also help ease housing burden because these will all help improve our demographic changes. And so his speech was filled with illustrative examples. Thank you very much for that informative and interesting speech. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Jin Yong Kim. He was the governor of the World Bank, the president of Dartmouth University, and the chair of the Harvard Medical School Global Health and Social Medicine, and is currently vice chairman of the Global Infrastructure Partners. I'd like to now invite Dr. Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. You know, when I listened to my old friend, Governor Chang Yong, talk about the entrance examination system here in Korea, I can guarantee that with my personality and my aptitudes, there's no way that I would have made it into any of the sky 대학교s. There's no way. I was so rebellious from such a young age in terms of the way I thought. And so I will get to that issue very soon. But I first want to just express how honored I am to be here at the conference that is really built in the spirit of my 선배님, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. I apologize to some of you who might have heard this last night. I said this at dinner, but when I was confirmed as president of the World Bank, one of the very first calls I got was from Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And of course, I had actually met him once, but he was this figure that I could only dream of meeting someday, and he called me right away. And because I had learned some Korean, I did research here in Korea during the years 1985 to 1988 on the healthcare system, and I'm actually a graduate of Yonsei University. So I'm an alumnus of Yonsei. So as soon as he called me, I answered him and I said, "선배님, thank you for calling me." And that was the start of a wonderful relationship. He was the leader, and he once, very early in my tenure, asked me to travel with him to some of the most difficult countries in Africa. And so when he said to me, why don't we go and travel together to Africa? I said to him in Korean, 물론이죠.
Of course. And I said in Korean, I will just carry your bag and it will be my honor just to be with him.
In English, I just said, look, I'll carry your bag and follow behind you. And that's exactly what I did. But then what he told me in response immediately, he said, that's fine, just make sure that those bags are full of money. And indeed, we had some of the most impactful visits. And when we first landed in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Secretary General told me that they had looked at the records and the history of the UN, and that was the first time in history that the World Bank President and Secretary General of the United Nations traveled anywhere together. And that's with so many disasters that they were going to, but they always went separately. And so I think we made 4 or 5 trips together, each one more impactful than the last. And so I just want to say I'm so honored to be here. I always say, 선배님 말씀하시는 대로 제가 다 하겠습니다. I will always go where he asks me to and do what he asks me. His kindness to me, he really was my 선배님. He showed me how the global system works. And I think now, 10 years after he finished his term, we can say with great confidence that he was by far one of the very most impactful Secretaries General in the history of the institution. 선배님. Now, I'm so delighted to be here with President Yoon of Yonsei and my friend Governor Rhee, Chang Yong. This is a really important talk that you just heard. I mean, in having known, I first met, I'll call him Chang Yong, in 1985. So it's been 40 years that we've been friends. He delivers the message in such a casual way, but I just want you to know that what he just talked to us about is extraordinary, especially in the world of people who do what he does, run critical institutions like the central bank. I want to say, everybody here in Korea is very lucky to have Chang Yong Rhee as your central bank governor. I knew him, of course, in his role at the IMF. He's always been a deeply respected economist, and it's not an accident that he's a governor of the BIS, the so-called Bank for International Settlements. Those positions are only given to the most respected economists in the world, and the fact that Korea now has a seat on that board is really important. Why would a central bank governor pay attention to something like climate change, much less to an issue like the total fertility rate? You know, when I heard that he was taking these issues on, and certainly after I read some of the things that the central bank had written and the things that he had written, and in fact, I got a copy of the speech ahead of time, I was really, really both impressed and moved that he would take these issues on. You know, the history of central bank governors, even ministers of finance, but especially central bank governors, taking on such long-range issues is very short. And during the time that I attended the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meetings, and that dates back to 2012, there was only one central bank governor who really engaged on global issues like climate change. And that person was Mark Carney, who now looks like he'll be the next Prime Minister of Canada. So Mark became a good friend, a brilliant economist, and every time I went to those meetings, the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meetings, I would say something about climate change. And the only one who would say anything in response, supporting the work that we were doing at the World Bank, was Mark Carney. I then went and said, has Mark ever talked about why he did that and justifying why he did that? And I found that he gave a speech in London after he'd become the governor of the Bank of England. And he talked about why he, as a central bank governor, would pay attention to such long-range issues like climate change. Now, the classic way that economists have thought about climate change is that it's an example of what they call the tragedy of the commons. And how many here students have studied the tragedy of the commons? Okay, a few. And so, I'm not an economist, but my basic understanding of the notion of the tragedy of the commons is that, one, individuals act in their own self-interest without considering the negative impact that might have on others, like overusing certain resources. Two, the individuals believe that others won't act in the interest of the group, so they consume even more. And that this can lead to overconsumption, underinvestment, and depletion of resources, seemingly the classic case for climate change. But Governor Carney said that it's actually, the tragedy of the commons is not the best way of thinking about climate change. He said that climate change is actually, and I quote, tragedy of the horizon. And again, I quote him, "We don't need an army of actuaries to tell us that the catastrophic impacts of climate change will be felt beyond the traditional horizons of most actors, imposing a cost on future generations that the current generation has no direct incentive to fix." That means, and this is still Mark Carney speaking, that means that these issues go beyond the business cycle, beyond the political cycle, and beyond the horizon of technocratic authorities like central banks who are bound by their mandates. The horizon for monetary policy extends out to 2 years. For financial stability, it's a bit longer, but typically only to the outer boundaries of the credit cycle, about a decade. In other words, and this is the final statement, in other words, once climate change becomes a defining issue for financial stability, it may already be too late. In my view, what Governor Rhee has done by choosing to focus on these long-range issues, especially like climate change, but also the total fertility rate, is nothing less than an enormous gift for the Korean people and for the world. If he were to wait, like just about everybody else, until those tragedies had a direct impact on the typical horizon of technocrats and central banks, it would be far too late. And so I want to be clear about this. There have been criticisms that he is a central banker. Why is he taking on these other issues? And I think that what I would argue is that I don't know why more central bankers don't take on these issues. The data that he's presented about both climate change and total fertility rate are some of the best I've seen. And I think we simply have to take heed of what he's talking about, because this will determine the outcomes of any policies that we put in place today, these long-range issues. Now, in terms of the total fertility rate issue, I was, of course, intrigued by his recommendation for reform in the admissions process for universities. I'm really glad he raised this issue, because as I said right in the beginning, I think there's no way that I would have gotten into any of the great schools here. And I kind of think if I had stayed in Korea, where would I have ended up? You know, who knows? I can't sing, so I don't think I'd be an idol. But I wonder what would have happened to me with the way that my mind works. And it especially reminded me of the process for me getting the job of being president of Dartmouth College. So my career was focused on global health. I spent time in Africa, I spent time in Latin America, I spent time even in the Russian prison systems treating tuberculosis. So that was my background. And out of the blue, the chairman of the search committee at Dartmouth College for the presidency happened to be a physician that worked in the same system that I did at Harvard Medical School. And he heard me speak at a conference, and he came up to me and he just said, "Hey, have you ever thought about being a university president?" And my answer, truthfully, was no, never. I would never want to do that. And he said, "You know, why don't you just talk to the person who ran the company who was doing the search." So it was done by a very well-known group called Isaacson Miller. John Isaacson was the founder. And so John interviewed me for about 3 hours, had read everything I'd ever written, looked at speeches that I'd been given. And at the end of my 3-hour meeting with John Isaacson, he said, "Okay, Jim, look, you're an interesting guy, but there's no way you're going to get this job, right? Just forget it. You're not going to get this job." And he was very nice about it. And so I thought, okay, you know, that makes sense. I never wanted a job like that anyway. I've spent all my time trying to provide health care for people in poor countries. But then he called me back, and he said he was almost, I don't know if it's the right word, he was kind of befuddled. He couldn't understand it, but he said, "You know, they want to meet you." And so I don't know why, because I don't think you're the right person for the job, but they want to meet you, the search committee. So having gotten such good mentoring over many years, what I've been told was that if any time anyone asks you to interview for an important job, especially when it's in the academic world, you have to take it very seriously and do everything you can to present yourself as a worthy candidate. Because even if they don't select you, and even if you decide you don't want that job, the search committee will be better, because they'll know, oh, okay, interesting person, we don't want that, but now we have a better idea of what we want. So I put everything I had into preparing for the interview. And in the process, I was trying to think to myself, I've spent my entire life trying to improve the health of the poorest people in the world. What the heck am I going to tell them about why I want to be president of an Ivy League university? And then I found, I was reading every single newspaper going back 30 years or so, every single student newspaper, even the right-wing newspapers that had famously grown up on the Dartmouth campus. And in one of the more recent issues of the right-wing student newspaper, they had an article about a previous president named John Sloan Dickey. And John Sloan Dickey was the very first head of public relations at the United States State Department under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he was a young man, 39 years old, and in his very first convocation speech, coming from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's State Department, he ended his speech by saying this, and I still remember it word for word because it was so impactful to me. He looked at the students and he said, I just want to leave you with two thoughts. First, the world's troubles are your troubles. I mean, he knew what he was talking about. He was from the State Department. The world's troubles are your troubles. But then he said, but because the worst troubles of the world come from within the hearts of men, and just as an aside, there were only men at Dartmouth at that time. Because the worst troubles of the world come from within the hearts of men, there's nothing wrong with the world that better human beings cannot fix. And when I read that, I thought, oh my God, that is the best mission statement for a university I've ever heard. And so I went through the interview, lots of talk about what I'd done, my academic work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last question they asked me was, why do you want this job? And my answer was, well, I didn't really think I wanted this job, but I read this quote from John Sloan Dickey, and he was one of the most famous presidents of Dartmouth ever, so everyone knew who he was, but no one knew this quote, right? And literally, the search team members, especially the older ones who were alumni, they had tears coming down their eyes, right? And that's how I got the job. Now, John Isaacson was right. I was probably the wrong person for that job, right? And after 3 years, I went on to be president of the World Bank, which was much better for me. But at that moment, I felt like I understood in a profound way the role of a university, right? And so if the role of the university is to nurture those better human beings, right, that can cure the ills of the world, then I don't see how you can do that with an admissions policy that only uses a single test, right? I think it's impossible to do it based on a single test. At Dartmouth, what we tried to do every year was to build a class that was so diverse in its experiences, in its aptitudes, in socioeconomic status, geographical distribution. We wanted to create an environment that would nurture souls, that would build up the ability of all of them to deal with the world that they were going into, right? And there's a lot of great data showing that even on, say, teams trying to do biological research, they've shown that if the team that's doing biological research has people coming from multiple viewpoints, applied mathematicians, pure biologists, chemists, the more diverse opinions you have, the faster they can get to innovative solutions. So there must be great comfort in having a single test and having admissions based on that single test, because that system has persisted here in Korea. But I don't think it's the way that you build a population of people who are ready to take on the world's troubles, ready to face the world's challenges. So President Yoon, I just want to tell you, I stand ready to help you in any way if you make the decision that you're going to lead the way and change the admissions process. I think Koreans will then quickly respond and start doing all these things that are required, but that's what the world requires. And I say this in thinking about Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, right? I mean, I've always told the Secretary General that I think of him as the GOAT of diplomacy, the greatest of all time. That's what GOAT, that's what an Americanism that we use. He is like Usain Bolt or Michael Jordan. He has endless stamina and energy for diplomacy, but also endless stamina for tackling so many different issues. He had to tackle climate change. He had to tackle military policy. He had to tackle refugees. All of these things fell under his remit. And each time I saw the way he read every single note he got, he outlined them, he prepared for everything. That's the spirit that he brought to the work of being Secretary General. And that is the scope of issues that Koreans must take on. So I just leave you, with a final set of problems that I want to also put on the table that I think is very much related to the issues that Governor Rhee talked about. Do we have slides? So I want to raise this because I think it's another indication of why we need to tackle these long-term issues, because there are things that are happening in Korean society that we simply have to pay attention to. And I spoke about this last year, but since last year, the suicide rate in Korea has gotten worse. And many of you know that there were 4 recent suicides of very well-known people, right? And again, I put on my anthropologist hat, because in anthropology and sociology, we all read Emile Durkheim. Emile Durkheim was the father of sociology. And he wrote an entire book on suicide. And his argument was that high suicide rates are the surest indication of social disintegration, of the lack of social connectivity. And indeed, that's what we see. This slide, Korea has had the highest suicide rates in OECD for over 20 years. Right? And in fact, about 10 years ago, a group of scholars from OECD came to Korea to try to help address the issue of suicide, but their recommendations were never taken seriously. The chart on the left, suicide rate trends by age and sex, the most disturbing thing is that people in their teens, 20s, and 30s, the leading cause of death is suicide. There are very few other countries in which the leading cause of death for people in the 10s, 20s, and 30s is suicide. And of course, you can see that the highest rate of suicide among all OECD countries is in Korea. This is another part of the tragedy. So on the left, what you see is that Korea has the highest suspected rate of depression. And depression is directly connected to suicide, but depression also is connected to the low birth rate. If people are depressed, feeling hopeless, think there's no future for them, they are at risk of suicide, and they're also very unlikely to get married and have children. While 27.8% of Korean adults are thought to suffer from depression, only 4.5% get any therapy. And in terms of just the amount of therapy, the average in OECD is 66 of the dose per 1,000 population. That's the average in OECD. In Korea, unfortunately, the rate is about a third of that. So Koreans are treated for depression at about a third the rate in other countries. I want to thank, is Professor Kim Hyun-chul here in the audience? Thank you. Thank you for coming. This is wonderful data. He's one of the world experts on, he's both a physician and an economist, and he's done fantastic work on trying to understand the social roots, what are the causes of these high suicide rates. And again, as Chang Yong, as Governor Rhee has told us, these are addressable issues. And in fact, this is one of the most interesting graphs I've ever seen. So the rate of suicide for young people is going up, but the rate of suicide for elderly people is going down. And on the graph on the right, what you see is that when spending per elderly person in a city or district increases by 1 million Korean won, right? So if you increase spending specifically focused on these elderly, the suicide rate goes down. In those districts, the suicide rate goes down. So in other words, Korea has already demonstrated that there are specific programs that can reduce the suicide rate. Now, another deeply disturbing phenomenon that, again, I didn't really appreciate until I started looking into this issue is the poverty rate among Koreans over 65. I was very shocked to learn that it's, again, the highest in OECD. Over 40% of Koreans over 65 are living below the poverty line. And the common way of thinking about this that I've heard is that the generation over 65 today is the first generation that went broke taking care of their parents and educating their children. And because their children's job prospects are as dim as they've been, right, they've also been not necessarily abandoned, but their children cannot support them as they supported their own parents. Right? And this is directly related to the higher suicide rate. And loneliness numbers are also very important. And if someone says that on a questionnaire, this is a study that was done in the United States, if someone says on a questionnaire that, yes, I am lonely, just check, yes, I am lonely, the decrease in life expectancy for that person is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, right? So it's a definite, that has a definite impact on life expectancy, just to admit that you're lonely. And of course, in Korea, we have this phenomenon of godoksa, right? That is so painful to watch. Now, I'm just going to give a quick shout out to an organization that I'm part of. Our CEO, Ryo Haewon, is back there in the audience. Chang Dong-sun, another founder. We have our 2 interns. We're trying to do something about this. And we're, one, raising awareness around mental health, trying to improve access to treatment, and also going to work with people around the globe. You know, Finland had a very high suicide rate that they brought down. Japan is the most famous case. In 1985, Japan's suicide rate was double Korea's suicide rate. And today, that has exactly reversed. Korea's suicide rate is 40% higher than Japan's suicide rate. And they, in a perhaps somewhat similar cultural context, were able to bring that down. And I think we need to do that. So I'm so honored to be here. I just want to plead with the people in Korea. Listen to Governor Rhee. He is doing something that is not the usual practice for central bank governors. But he is saying that rather than simply ignoring anything that won't have an impact in the next 2 years, or even the next 10 years, but something that is fundamental to the future of Korean society, I am going to look beyond that and take as my responsibility addressing these issues of climate change and low fertility. Everybody in Korea, all the leaders, especially graduates of elite institutions like Yonsei, have to take seriously these concerns because they are fundamental existential threats. I don't know of a single other society in the world that's facing the highest suicide rate, the highest elderly poverty rate, the lowest birth rate ever recorded for a nation state in human history, and like every other country, the impacts of climate change all at the same time. These are existential threats. But I also don't know of a single other country that I have as much faith in being able to tackle these issues as Korea. Korea has been the phoenix that has risen from the ashes time and time again, and I am absolutely convinced that it will do it again in the face of these challenges. Thank you.
Dr. Jin Yong Kim, thank you so much. And your talk was so inspiring and so interesting. And he said that if he were in Korea, he would not get into a Sky University, but well, he was born in Severance Hospital and he lived in Shincheon, so the probability of him getting into Yonsei would be the highest. Thank you so much for your inspiring talk. And he brought up a lot of important points about the tragedy of commons and how people act in a very selfish manner and pursue their own interests. And as Governor Lee mentioned, that type of tendency has influenced this consequence of concentration in the capital area. Now, I would like to ask a question to Governor Lee first. Humans have this tendency to pursue their own interests rather than thinking about the common interests. Then, against this backdrop, when we think about the role of universities, in your view, what kind of leadership do we need to nurture on these college campuses? So, Governor Lee, please go ahead. Right. As was mentioned, individuals have vested interests, so it's not easy to coordinate their interests. But I believe this is what democracy is all about. In the past, we had immature democracy in Korea, and back then, economic development was our #1 priority. So that was the driver, and we had a very strong leader, political leader, and there was this kind of consensus within Korean society that we have to put aside our individual rights or interests so that we could develop the economy first. But now the situation is different, and we have much more diversity and divergence of interests. And that's there are pros and cons of an advanced or mature society. It is a fact that people pursue their own interests, but at the same time, we need to have some sort of mechanism to adjust and coordinate these conflicting interests. This is a big issue. In religious terms, you're supposed to care for the less privileged, and I believe this is a very important mission. And when you think about your own call, you need to care for others, not just pursuing your own interests, but you have to care for others, and that is what the positive influence of religion. And I believe that such attitude, caring for others, and altruism and religious belief may not be able to cover everything. That may not be sufficient. So we need good politics. We need good governance. And so in that sense, I feel very worried. We have obvious theories that tell us how we need to address these issues. But if you have a good political process, then you can address many social issues. But now politics is very divisive. So this is concerning. I won't be able to give you the answer right away, but I'd like to say that there's role of politics. It's not technocrats, but it's political leaders. Their will, their good system and intentions all need to function properly so that we can pursue more common interests. And as Dr. Jim Yong Kim mentioned, the high rates of suicide in Korea, and in particular, suicide rates of younger people, very concerning. And the elderly suicide rate has gone up but has gone down recently. And now a lot of young people feel depressed. There's intensifying competition, a lot of pressure on these young people. And for older people, their suicide rate has been declining thanks to better social welfare programs. Of course, in terms of the absolute suicide term, it's still pretty high, but we need to address the concerns of the younger generation, including education. And I was a professor, so, well, faculty, these professors, they have to admit thousands of students per year, and when there's even a single suspicion about unfair admission of any particular student, this may be very big controversy in Korean society. This will lead to an inspection by the Ministry of Education. Well, there are a lot of regulations that the Ministry of Education would like to impose on college education because elementary K-12 is left to the regional offices of education. So there's a lot of conflict involved. And as we had this discussion last night, but as per the aging population, we not only need to provide social welfare, but we need to improve the healthcare system itself. Currently, there are all discussions on whether hospitals need to be for-profit or non-profit. That is a very controversial issue. But I'd like to argue that we should provide more preventive healthcare services so that we can stop them from getting seriously ill. These healthcare services need to be incentivized, and we may allow foreign workers for care services to come into Korea and provide care services. So there are a lot of options and solutions we can think about, but there are a number of constraints. And the bottom line is different groups have their vested interests, and they only care about their own interests. And in a democratic society, we cannot have any strong dictator who would dictate what to do, but we need a more political leadership and decision-making and governance.
It was actually a very tough question, but you gave us a great answer, so thank you very much. And so ultimately, what kind of students do we want to educate and nurture? So Governor Lee gave us a very comprehensive answer. We need to build up leaders. We need to build up better human beings through our education. And in terms of raising such talent, we need to focus on cohesion and the ability to coordinate with one another. So those things need to be emphasized. And so going forward, universities need to be more keen on these values. And President Kim, would you like to add something?
You know, it's leadership is a tough issue because, you know, what does it mean really? And but for me, I've had a leadership coach for most of the last 30 years. And the last 15 years, I had a leadership coach that I met while I was at Dartmouth, and you know, the essence of a great leader, in my coach's view, and he's one of the most famous coaches. He coached a lot of the, you know, Fortune 50 company CEOs. For him, the key to being a great leader was the ability to listen to the direct feedback of the people underneath you, right? And so what he does is he interviews all the people who report to you, and then after completely, literally purging his mind of who said what, he gives you feedback that is usually just devastating. Right? And the task then of the leader is to go back to the people who report to him or her and say, thank you for your feedback. I want to get better. Can you help me get better? Which is an incredibly difficult process, right? And so it would go against very dramatically the kind of ways that hierarchies work in Korea, right? And so Korea is now, I think, facing a time where fundamental questions about how to shape the culture going forward are on the table. And you know, I'm encouraged to see so many people from all over the world who are going to school in Korea. You know, KAIST especially, I think, is way, you know, in the lead in terms of inviting people from all over the world. But I see them at every university. You know, I think bringing in diverse students, first from all over the world, but also from inside Korea, people with very different kinds of perspectives from different social classes, is important. I don't have a formula for it, but I think that the most important thing is that Korean people have to start a conversation about how to make the kind of social change we need. Right? So if you look at, when I first started working on education at the World Bank, I was so encouraged to see that the PISA scores, you know, the PISA, the great way of measuring student performance throughout the world, Korea was always number 1 or 2 in the world, right? And that was great. But on the back of that was loss of hope, the high suicide rate, depression, anxiety, and a fertility rate that's the lowest ever recorded in human history, right? So on the one hand, what we were doing here was great in terms of getting people to be able to do well on standardized tests, but that process led to the situation that we're in right now. China is experiencing the same thing. They've called it the lying down movement. Young people are simply saying, we're not going to compete anymore. And so many of them are going and living in Buddhist monasteries. And so the Buddhist monasteries are complaining because there's too many people. This is a time to once again have a conversation that's going to be very uncomfortable, but absolutely essential. And that's why I think, Governor Rhee bringing those issues from the central bank is so important. Every leader in every industry, every company, every university, every think tank has to do the same, has to bring these questions to the front.
Yes, thank you very much for your answer. It was a really great answer, so thank you. So all in all, so we need to have the ability to listen well and to communicate, to coordinate, and to foster the spirit of cohesion. So we need to build up these abilities among our leaders. And when we think about our given situation, yes, so we are increasing more diverse admission programs. And as Governor Rhee mentioned, it's in order to admit many diverse students, we need to consider their geographic background. But it is not easy in Korea. But everyone agrees that we need to have a more diverse talent and we need to raise them up as leaders. That's the role of universities. So how are we going to do this? So I think that is a big question in front of us, particularly educational institutes. I think the time ran out very quickly, much faster than I expected. But since we have a really important panelist today, so I just want to throw out one more topic.
This may be a difficult topic to discuss, but Governor Lee of the Bank of Korea mentioned that climate change, when climate change has detrimental impact on the economy, it may be too late. Just like getting sick. If you are too sick, then it will be too late, and you have to try to be healthy. And the fertility rate right now, last year was 0.75, so it is good that it has gone up slightly, but it is still very challenging. And if this trend continues for some time, we may have even more serious problems in terms of regional economic development. And the theme of this year's GEEF is time for action. So we need to act quickly. And in developing what our course of action, we need to be less selfish, but think more in terms of public good. Now, in terms of policy, what are the most urgent policy actions we need to take? Any recommendations? And then we will wrap up. So, well, this may not be an easy question, but I don't know. But, well, this is a question that we've been discussing. So if I were to rank any actions in terms of their priority, I won't be able to do that because there's so many urgent issues that are all connected. He talked about suicide rates, and we talked about fertility rate, but there's hope. About 10 years ago, I would feel a little helpless, but now I believe that citizens in Korea are experiencing the impact of climate change and low fertility and other social issues and education as well. These are the results or consequences of what we did in the past. In the past, there was a belief that ranking students in terms of test results would be fair, but a lot of people do not think so anymore because there's a lot of pressure on young students, and many moms are working, and they feel guilty as a mother, as a working mom, because there is this expectation of mom taking care of their children for their education. So then, what do we need to do? What is our number one action that we need to take? There are a lot of areas we need to cover, but what I can say is that, well, we need to take the perspective of consumers, not just as policymakers. When we were developing our economy, we needed more production, we lacked producers, we had to foster manufacturing. So all our previous policies and subsidies and industrial policies were focused on producers and companies. But now, these producers or manufacturing companies have become a very strong group with vested interests. So when you think about restructuring and structural reforms, I believe you need to think about the perspective of consumers, not just producers. Going back to university entrance, it's cruel that students, senior high school students, need to decide which major to study. Well, there are more options available, but it's not easy for them to be able to choose or change major because the producers or professors, they have vested interests. They don't want to lose students and they don't want them to switch to other majors. For apples, the same. It's the same story. I suggested apple imports. Apple farmers were struggling. I'm not saying that they were not in a difficult position. In the past, Korean people thought that we had to protect our agriculture and our apple farmers, but we also need to think about consumers and what they need and what they want. Now, when the economy is struggling, the previous policy framework was to provide more support for producers. But we need to also think about the perspective of consumers. And there is no one-size-fits-all solution for each issue. So as governor of the Bank of Korea, when I consider policy options, I try to remember that the past solutions may not be applicable anymore. So we should move away from the past approaches, but we need to apply the perspective of consumers. Thank you very much.
You know, the problem of climate change is, you know, there are many countries just in this region that are going to have a bigger impact on how much carbon there is in the air than Korea. My view on climate change is it's every single human being on Earth's responsibility to try to leave a livable planet for future generations. And that's just not just Koreans, but for everybody. But on tackling specific social issues, I think that's Dr. Baek Jong-woo in the audience. Is that right? Yeah. Dr. Baek, yeah. So Dr. Baek is here. You know, I have to say, the data that I saw from Professor Kim Yeon-chul about, you know, a very simple relationship between increased spending and decreased suicide rates, these are very straightforward things that we can tackle. And what we're doing at Mindful Connect is to try to have the conversation about depression and treatment. And then, you know, when somebody dies by suicide, supporting the families as opposed to ostracizing them. Simple things that we can do that will make this a much more humane place. I think the total fertility rate is all hands on deck. Everyone has to think about how do we solve this problem. Because there's really, I don't know of a society, a modern industrialized society, that faces demographic collapse in the same way that the Republic of Korea faces, right? And there has to be, we have to work on so many different fronts at the same time. Governor Rhee talked about housing, talked about access to universities. There's just so many different issues that we've got to work on together. And to get it from 0.75 to the OECD average of 1.4, I mean, Japan spent many, many billions of dollars and worked on this for decades to get it from below 1 to now where they are is 1.3. And the lesson we learned there is it takes very determined effort and there's got to be social change. So climate change is something we all have to work on. We all have to try to do our best. But those other problems are so urgent for Korea and can only be solved by Korean people talking to each other. So, you know, again, I thank Secretary General Ban Ki-moon for offering us this platform in which to have this discussion.
Thank you very much. So today we had a really meaningful conversation. It was a really special conversation. It was so special. It went over by 10 minutes compared to the original schedule. But there are areas where we don't want to be number one in the world. For example, suicide rate. There are about 40 people who take their own lives in Korea. It's truly tragic, and it's truly urgent. We really need to deal with this without delay. And with the two panelists today, we earned such great insight and wisdom for what we could do to ensure a sustainable future. So I want to thank you, all of you, for being here with us, and I hope that today's discussion will be your starting point to begin your engagement and participation for a sustainable future. So thank you very much, Governor Lee and President Kim. Thank you very much. This will end the first session.
Thank you very much to all the panelists and the moderator for this great session. We've learned that the economic divide is not just about the financial situations of today, but it's looking into the societal issues of tomorrow, including education, aging society, societal support, and mental health. Thank you once again for a very inspiring session, and we will continue our sessions in 10 minutes at 10:50. Thank you very much.